We begin today Sri Aurobindo's commentary of the Kena Upanishad, entering its 14th chapter. As a quick recapitulation, we have read through his explanation and elucidation of the parable of the gods, in which successively the gods sent forward their representatives of Agni, Vayu, and Indra to determine who is this divine presence that has appeared. And at the last stage, when the first two have failed, when Indra moves forward, that vanishes. And he, in that ether, meets the woman, Uma Haimavati, divine nature, also supreme consciousness, who reveals to Indra that that was the divine, the Brahman. And we have seen the meaning of this both in our individual evolution of consciousness and in the collective evolution of humanity. What these represent as stages of our evolution and of our awakening. Two important observations from the passage we read last time. Sri Aurobindo points out that in this culmination of the story, the three powers within us, Agni as the conscious force that supports the physical body and the life in the body, Vayu as the master of the life energies, and Indra as the master of the mind. All three have to learn to become passive to the divine and to be able to receive and reflect the divine consciousness and the divine nature into life. The conscious surrender of ourselves to the divine involves two parallel movements. The first is the turning of our consciousness in mind, life, and senses to that which is master of our mind, life, and senses. And in the process, they become means by which the nature of the divine can reflect in our nature. Our consciousness turns to the divine, by which the divine can reflect in our consciousness. So there is a double movement. Not only our consciousness awakens, aligns with, and eventually unites with the divine consciousness, but our nature begins to become a conscious reflector and representation, even reproducer of the divine nature. So this is a double movement in the evolution. It is not the soul withdrawing, it is not nature alone undergoing a change, but an awakening both of consciousness and a transformation of nature. The second thing to observe is that in this transformation of nature, the three, Indra, Vayu and Agni, mind, life and body, the three reflect that which is their normal character. So in the physical consciousness, Agni, as the conscious force that supports our embodied life, when it becomes a pure reflector, it reflects the power of that in matter. And the result is the material form created by this material process of the material force undergoes a change. What change will it be? The most obvious will be the rigidity of the form. The way the force is hampered, that is overcome. Because that which it reflects is infinitely plastic. And so the physical body itself becomes more plastic, more conscious, more responsive. As a result, many of the activities or habits associated with inertia, incapacity and weakness, they fade. because the force in the body is no more hampered. Practically, therefore, the body is able to remain younger, freer, more conscious, and more freely expressive. And you can see implied in this whole process is a physical transformation where the physical body becomes capable of embodying the divine consciousness and representing it even physically. Similarly, when the life energy in us becomes passively potent reflection and image of the Supreme Life, it acquires its characteristic. And the Supreme Life, unlike our life, is not narrow, it is infinite. And so its action in us also is infinite. Its relation with the universe represents that infinity, and we feel ourselves one with all life. Even as we act through a special focus in our consciousness, we receive the impacts of all life in the universe and engage with all life in the universe freely. Freely means you have also the choice to be narrow as needed, but you're not bound to the narrowness. And therefore this indicates a potential also of transformation of our life energy, which is presently to us still far. And finally, the nature of the mind, when it becomes a faithful mirror of the image of the superconscient existence, the nature of its knowledge and its means of knowledge also reflect that. And the knowledge of that is spontaneous, effortless, not labored out, not created, not formed and structured, but a seeing which is itself a creative seeing. What it sees, it creates. And our mind therefore acquires a similar character when it becomes a perfect reflector. So implied in the text and made more explicit in Sri Aurobindo's commentary is this idea that not only do the powers working within us, the gods, awaken to their real source, the real source of their capacity in the divine consciousness, but as a result, they undergo a change. And this change is the theme of the next chapter, which he has titled The Transfiguration of the Self and the Gods. Why self and the gods? Remember, it was a double movement. Our consciousness reflects the divine consciousness, and our nature, and that means the powers of the gods working in our nature, reflect the divine nature. So transfiguration of the self and the gods, a double movement. He begins with a brief recapitulation. The means of the knowledge of Brahman are, we have seen, to get back from the forms of the universe to that which is essential in the cosmos. And that which is essential is twofold: the gods in nature and the self in the individual. And then to get back, and then to get behind these to the beyond which they represent. So how are we Brahman? And remember, this was the theme several chapters ago. And the Kena itself teaches us that you cannot know the Brahman, and yet there has to be some means by which you can begin the process. And for that, the first step it teaches is that of it which is you, that of it which is in the gods. This you have to think out. So this was again already a double movement, which is in you and which is the God, meaning in workings. So the first step was this. The second step, with this you do not know. If you think you know, then you have made a mistake. Beyond this is one more step, where from that consciousness you become aware of the source of that consciousness. And that is given in this story, in the parable of the gods, where the gods, having emerged victorious, having come to know themselves, their greatness and their power, are suddenly challenged by the Brahman which places this. And they not only realize their insufficiency, they are forced now to know the source of that which is greater than themselves. And in the last teaching, the Divine Mother reveals to them that of the eternal is this victory in which you shall grow to greatness. And the gods realize, oh, it is the victory of the divine in us which makes us victorious. So this is the second stage of the awakening to the knowledge of Brahman. First step, stepping back to your own consciousness, which is essential in you, the self of the individual. Who am I? I could say I am all this, I am all these thoughts, I am all these habits, but what is behind them? Until you come to the most essential, formless consciousness. Inwardly and externally, as you observe the universe, what is the reality of this universe? You peel off the layers of appearance until you discover behind all the workings in the universe, behind all the laws of physics, of psychology, and of life processes, the conscious beings and powers, cosmic in their operation, working, the gods. And now you have two essentials, the self within you and the gods in nature. And just as the gods are forced to take one more step to realize that of which their victory is the source, so too we take a step back to realize that of which our individual soul is a representation. So this is the two-step process by which we can know the Brahman. The first step prepares for the second. Because in the first step, you have already taken a step beyond the mind. You cannot jump straight from your mind's awareness to the Brahman because the mind is incapable of knowing the Brahman. But the mind can open to its own deeper awareness, which then is capable of knowing Brahman. And that's why the necessity of two steps. Now, what this means practically is also elaborated. The practical relation of the gods to Brahman in this process of divine knowledge has been already determined. This was part of a larger discussion, but he summarizes the cosmic functionings through which the gods act: mind, life, speech, senses, body, must become aware of something beyond them, which governs them, by which they are and move, by whose force they evolve, enlarge themselves, and arrive at power and joy and capacity. To that they must turn from their ordinary operations. Now here is the transition being made. First of all, we recognize the gods are these powers working in us. You will recall the larger discussion we have had. Not only they are powers working in us individually, but equally in the cosmic level in the same operations. Therefore, we are reminded again and again, as individuals, we are a representation of the entire cosmos. Not only what happens out there is represented inside us, perhaps as a minute function, but in quality identical with that which is operating in the cosmos. But equally, in that identity, what is out there is a representation of what is happening in us. There is a two-way connection. And this is the basis of so many powers of the human being. There are obviously the evolved powers, such as our power to act energetically, our power to know and to communicate, but there are also those still undeveloped powers which would permit us not only to know beyond the physical senses, but to act beyond our physical instruments, to be able to move and modify objects directly by the application of the will, which are powers already in us latent. But this is possible because that thing there and this thing within are identical in essence. And therefore we are able to act on the things outside through that common identical power. So this identity is implied in this discussion. So we still focus on the functioning of the gods in individually, perhaps our mind, life, speech, senses, body. In each of these, we become aware of something beyond. Now, in this, you will notice constantly in the way the modern mind works, we have to translate from the gods to our psychological powers. We have to keep saying our mind, life, speech, senses, body. But in the mentality of the Vedic Rishi, they are conscious gods. They are conscious powers. To the modern mind, because we have been taught from childhood to think of these as functions, energies, almost mechanical and unconscious, that we do not think of them as conscious powers. When you say, my intelligence, I have an intelligence, or I am developing my intelligence is growing, you are seeing it only as a function. In the crudest and lowest understanding, it will be the power of the brain's working, which is more efficient because the cells are communicating more freely and rapidly. But that does not explain the full power of the mind's working. So we go a little more and we say, all right, we have a mind, and my mind is working more efficiently, which makes for my intelligence as a phenomenon. This is our thinking. But to the Vedic mind, the intelligence itself is not a phenomenon, it is a pre-existing power. And it is a conscious power. It manifests in you, but was already cosmic and operating in the cosmos. When it manifests in you, it takes on an individual and narrower character of working. And it is possible, therefore, to invite that power to enter and activate it. It is possible to intensify its working, again by relating to it. It is possible also to nourish it. You will recall the discussion in the previous chapter, when briefly we had also taken a text from the Sri Aurobindo's Secret of the Veda, where he describes in that text how delight in divine existence leads to growth in clear, illuminated intelligence. This was about Indra. Meaning, when our mind takes delight in the divine existence, that intelligence in us, the working of Indra, it is nourished. It grows. Same with our emotions and life energies. When we turn to life and take delight in the divine life, in the divine existence, in life, again our life energies grow and are nourished. And the same with the senses. When we look through the senses and enjoy the delight in the sensory experience and as expressions of the colors of the divine, our powers of the senses grow. Now, none of us in the beginning consciously perceive these things as divine. Just the fact of enjoying through the senses, the taste, the smells, the colors, the contact, the fact that there is this enthusiasm of enjoyment flowing through already intensifies and helps them to grow. And the same with our life energies and mind. If you leave a child sitting idle in a room with no exposure to colors, sounds, or activities which would give it delight, you will find all the faculties will dull because they do not grow. Instead of trying to teach the child and whip it into awakening of its capacity, you leave them free. Free to play and explore their universe in activities that they enjoy. Toys, games, books, objects to build and play, plants to relate to, animals to relate to, human beings with whom to interact, enjoying each time in the growth. You will find they push the limits of their faculties and they grow so rapidly. The idea that we can drill the intelligence to grow is silly. You can provide an opportunity for the intelligence to nourish and manifest itself more. To evoke it by attracting it through nourishment. Almost like when you invite an animal into your home by giving it, offering a food that it likes. So Indra, as the working power of the cosmic mind, you invoke into your mind to have his intelligence grow and fill you more and more by nourishing. Now, as I said, initially none of us are conscious that these are divine things. And so the nourishment takes it only so far. From the point where we begin to perceive these things as also realities of the divine and begin to enjoy and know from that perspective, that enriches and enormously amplifies the working of all these powers because they awaken to their divine source. They are more fulfilled. And this is what he is describing. The cosmic functionings through which the gods act: mind, life, speech, senses, body. Now all of these are workings of the gods working through them. These cosmic functionings must become aware of something beyond them which governs them, by which they are and move. So it's as if our consciousness, intelligence, our happiness even of the emotions, all of these turn to the source which has been nourishing them. They exist by them, they move by that, by whose force they evolve. The force within us pushing to grow the intelligence, to grow our senses, to grow our strength. The force pushing is also of that. You could ask yourself this simple question: why does a child want to know? Why does a child want to explore? The impulse pushing out is that impulse. Only we do not realize it. As adults, it is exactly the same thing. Only we are a little jaded. We do not have the freshness of the child, and so the effort in us to reach beyond our limits is not so clear. And only because we did not see the true object of these efforts. In our growing years, we clung to the forms. We clung to the appearances or chased after the appearances. And the result was we were defeated again and again. We were disappointed. We were made to lose hope, to accept incapacity because it does not work. And so as adults, somewhere within us, the impulse has weakened and even perhaps stopped. And these are the signs of aging. When you stop growing. Youth is when you continue to grow. But what is the difference? What made you stop? Because you chased after appearances and forms, and that always disappointed. If instead you pursue that which is in the forms, that which is behind the forms, even if you miss the forms, you always come a little closer to that which is behind. And the youth continues all through, because it is never defeated. It is always learning, always growing. So, whose force they evolve. The cosmic functionings act by whose force they evolve. And then comes this very interesting statement, as if elaborating what is the nature of the evolution. How do you know that you have evolved? What are the signs of evolution? If I sprout a third hand, will that be evolution? If I have 5 hands instead of 2, will that be evolution? No, it's not that. It is the increase of the skill in the hand which is the evolution. Even if I had 1 hand, it would still be evolution. So what is it that distinguishes evolution from mere growth? If my body becomes 10 times larger, you would not say it has evolved. It has only grown. Even it has devolved. So what is it that distinguishes evolution? And he elaborates here, you see, when he says the cosmic functionings should become conscious of that, by whose force they evolve, and then he says, enlarge themselves and arrive at power and joy and capacity. So the first character of evolution is the enlarging of consciousness, of the power, not the form. The power within enlarges, when your intelligence enlarges, when your life energies grow, when your senses widen. And at that point you'll say, yes, this is a sign of evolution. First, and this is purely an essential movement enlarging in the consciousness. And as a result of that enlargement, what is the thing you reach? Arrive at power and joy and capacity. Three interesting facets. The intelligence widening, what is it that it is coming to? It's not merely widening for its own sake. In the widening, there are things which are growing. Power of the intelligence. It is able to cut through more. It is able to see and acquire or hold or relate to or engage with more. It is able to break through resistance and limitation. Second, joy. In the working of the intelligence, there is a greater joy. And the same with the life energies. Your power of life energy grows, that you're able to do more, but there is also the joy in doing, which is more. And the third, capacity. And the capacity here is a measure distinctly of even the physical capacity. In the working of the intelligence, it is able to process so much more, many more details, much wider in size and scope and so on. It's the same with power. It can do so much in terms of stamina, in terms of intensity of force and so on. The measure of the most material part is what is represented here by capacity. And in all these, there is greater enlargement. Leaving the false idea of action and self-ordering, the false idea of independent action and self-ordering, which is an egoism of mind and life and sense, they must become consciously passive to the power, light, and joy of something which is beyond themselves. So now there is one side which is the growing. The other side is in the growth, what do you let go? What do you leave behind? And why is this important? Because the things which you're leaving behind are sometimes the things which have helped you in the past. And that's the reason why the leaving behind is so important. If you do not recognize that their utility is over, you are unable to grow and proceed. So he describes these, leaving these. What? The false idea of independent action and self-ordering, which is an egoism of mind and life and sense. So the false idea of independent action and self-ordering, we have been taught often deliberately in childhood, or sometimes even in the late adulthood, that what we do is independent. You are acting in your freedom. So the growing child in his teenage says, I want to exercise my independence. What is stopping me? All these rules which the parents impose, all these limitations that society places before me. And so to break those rules is my freedom, and I assert my freedom by going against everything. Apparently, it seems right. But look a little deeper. The impulse to break the freedom, the impulse to break the rules, leads to what? Only an indulgence in the desire which came with the impulse. I want this for my own satisfaction or pleasure, so I break the rules in order to satisfy myself. And you realize very quickly the drive to satisfy yourself against all those imposed rules is a greater slavery. Now I'm enslaved to my desire, and where did the desire come from? I didn't choose it. If you actually choose your desire, then you should be able to say, I refuse this desire. Can you do that? And the teenager cannot. The teenager is unable to control himself from this desire. And so he is actually enslaving himself to something deeper in abandoning the external rules. Now it's a passage. It's a useful passage even, but it's a false idea of independent action. Now, very quickly, you learn this does not work. You even impose upon yourself disciplines to try to train yourself to grow free of your desire and so on, precisely by limiting the desire, precisely sometimes by suppressing or modifying them and so on, to gain a higher freedom. But even with that, when I have acquired my sense of higher freedom, now I'm a good person living by all those values which I thought I should live by, am I truly free? And Sri Aurobindo points to the prison of virtues. Your virtuous character becomes your prison, and that's a much more difficult prison to break from. Having got free of that, are you truly free of your human nature? And this is a moot point. We cannot be sure because we are not even conscious of the sources of our thoughts, our impulses, and our desires. I have referred on many occasions to certain fascinating experiments in the laboratory where we are able to watch the brain as a person thinks or acts. And one of the things which they try to find is the seat of your free will. From where in the brain do you actually choose to do this or not to do this? And so they watch the brain, and what they notice, the person is asked to choose, press a left button or right button. And at the moment where he is conscious of a free choice, he indicates by pressing the button. What is interesting is in the brain processes, with the fMRI scans, you can see dynamically the movement of electrical signals changing. An entire quarter of a second before, you can see the brain has chosen. And then the person becomes conscious a quarter of a second later. And so the suggestion to the researchers was, well, actually there is no free will because it's already being determined by a process in the brain. Of course, this is an erroneous interpretation. The reality is there are layers in the mind. Somewhere deep within us is the impulse of the choice emerging through layers until it hits that layer which I call I am conscious, the conscious layer, liminal, lit up. Subliminal, behind or below, is the layer I am not conscious of, but it is conscious differently. It is there that the impulse originates, and from there it hits my limbed, lit up conscious awareness. So the question is, when I'm free and I'm making a choice, am I really exercising a true freedom? And the point Sri Aurobindo makes here is that, in fact, this idea of independent action is a false idea. Because if you could trace back the impulse, you will find as you go into the subliminal regions, it is often finding its roots in something which is much wider, even in a universal awareness. This is the reason why we have something which is called crowd psychology, where an entire group of people behaves in a way which is perfectly predictable, although you cannot predict the individual movement. There is something behind which has decided, and all the little individuals become like toys, modifying slightly the influence operating on them, so we cannot say exactly what. Overall, they will follow the impulse that is decided by the collective consciousness behind. Something which is beyond our individual separate awareness, which is actually the source of all of our sense of independent action and self-ordering. When I say I am growing, I am developing, I am doing, I did these exercises to develop my intelligence, to develop my senses, to develop my energy. Who did it? From where did the actual energy increase and the intelligence grow? It's like a doctor saying, by cleaning your wound and covering it with a band-aid, I have cured and healed your body. It is ridiculous. All you have done is removed the impediments to a healthy healing, but the healing itself was never done by you. The medicines you give are never healing you. They are only removing impediments to the body's own healing. Always the healing is taking place by your own body. But who in the body is healing? And again we step back to something else behind, which is actually doing over controlling and working through the processes, the gods behind. Or behind the gods, the origin, the Brahman. Now when you look at things in this way, all sense of self-ordering, I am doing, I am arranging, is a useful appearance on the surface for the egoism of mind and life and senses. I think I am doing, when in reality it is being done. Or I have removed impediments for what was being done so that it can happen more easily. My ego was actually an impediment. My sense of doership or non-doership was only an impediment. I only removed that much. In the text of the Synthesis of Yoga, which we studied about a month ago, you will recall, Sri Aurobindo describes how it is possible for the ego consciousness to completely step out of the personality and let the universal intelligence work through. And often you act with greater capacity and intelligence because the limitation brought in by the ego sense has been removed. And there's a more free and smooth transmission of deeper knowledge, inspiration and capacity. We notice in our own lives, there's a particular experience which nowadays is referred to as being in the zone. When you're in the zone, it just happens effortlessly. When you're out of the zone is when you're struggling to make it happen. You notice the difference in consciousness between these two states. When you're in the zone, you don't have the sense of doing it. It just happens. You are even almost like an observer, standing back, and the thing is done. It's so smooth and effortless. The moment you become self-conscious, your self-consciousness kicks in, and you say, I am doing it so well, and pluck, it breaks. You see, if you watch children, you tell them to take a bowl full of water and take it across the room without spilling a drop. Or you do it as adults. You're fully concentrated on the bowl, the water, the alignment, and you start moving. And your whole body is one awareness, keeping the balance. Do it as an experiment and you'll notice. Initially it moves perfectly well. And at some point it starts happening so well, your mind slowly steps out of that alignment. Now it's going on well, and look. Well, you may look away to tell people, look, or in your mind you think, oh, look, I'm doing it well. And that's when you spill it. Why? The ego consciousness crept forward until it hampered the smooth working. Observe carefully the two states. In the first state, you were in the zone, full alignment of your entire awareness. You are not moving your hands consciously. Everything is happening. You're only one pointed in your concentration on the intention to not spill. The moment you start adjusting with your hand, it breaks the rhythm. Even you're becoming conscious, self-aware, steps out and breaks this alignment. It's a very simple experiment, and one can train oneself to enter the zone at will for any activity. All experts in their field, whether it is in gymnastics or any skill of the body, or even in activities of the mind, have this experience of being in the zone. And in a sense, the full effort of the expert is to enter the zone, does not make an effort. I was reading recently an interview, well, not an interview, but reference to an interview of people who are skilled in throwing knives. Now, these are extremely sharp knives. They throw at a distance, the knives go spinning and hit exactly at a point. And often on the other side, there's a person standing. And the knives hit next to the head, next to the chest, next to the arms, precisely where they're supposed to. And the people who are skilled in that, they say the whole thing takes place in that state of being in the zone. And when they're in the zone, they have the sense that they're not doing it. They're even watching themselves doing it. And when the alignment is complete, they don't even need to be aware of their hands. They can be looking at the mirror, of a reflection in the mirror, or even with eyes closed, and they will get it right. Because something else, a different kind of intelligence works through, and all of our consciously made efforts are only interfering in what is otherwise a natural working through us. So when you think of it in these terms, our so-called experience of learning and growing and developing a skill is only an experience of removing impediments to allow the innate knowledge, capacity, intelligence to come forward and work through us, to become more and more transparent. And so when you take it in this spirit, the whole training system also can be modified. And if you modify the training to catch this principle, something which takes several years to train can be mastered often within a few weeks or months. And there are many systems today which try to capture this idea. But I'm giving all this in elaboration to show you that this very simple statement has such profound implications. That these deeper workings in us of the gods must, leaving the false idea of independent action and self-ordering, which is an egoism of mind and life and sense, they must become consciously passive to the power, light and joy of something which is beyond themselves. Now this statement can be understood in this full scope of life, down to the tiniest details. When you sit down to eat, you're eating, you're chewing, you're swallowing. Your tongue is moving in a complex way to move the food around while the teeth are mashing. Everything moves perfectly. If at that moment you try to consciously move the tongue or consciously work the teeth, you'll find something misses, the tongue is bit or your cheek gets bit. Or at that moment somebody surprises you and your attention breaks. Or you try to speak at the same time, which interferes with this automatic working, and something goes wrong. Everywhere it is this truth, that there is a far greater power which works through, and we can choose to become passive to its working, but to the power, light and joy of something which is beyond themselves. As this transparency within us grows, these three things come forward. There's a greater power in the working, there's a greater light in the awareness of also what you do, and a greater joy. It means you're able to do it more effectively, you have also deeper knowledge of what is happening through you, and a greater joy in the participation of what it is you do. The whole of life, the things we seek in life get enormously amplified as this egoism is removed. But he describes three kinds of egoism. Egoism of mind and life and sense. Now these three are not as easy to recognize. The egoism of the mind is the idea that I am doing. I am making the effort. That's when you are breaking the state of being in the zone. The egoism of life is more difficult to recognize. It is the sense that I am separate, that I am engaging with an object which is other than I, and I am doing this with that. The moment the egoism of life comes, you will find there is what is often described as a stage fright. Some kind of fear comes in. Here is this huge situation. I am so small. How will I ever manage? And because we are separate, and that is bigger, this is smaller. Or the same thing takes a different form. That is so small, I am so big, I can easily defeat it. The arrogance, and with it carelessness. But when the egoism of life is removed, that and me are one continuum, and what is done is simply done. The egoism of sense is also something much more difficult to become conscious of. It is the sense of It takes two forms: the sense of the observer in the perception, and the sense that what you are observing is separate from you. You're listening to music. There is music that you're listening to. I must listen carefully. Can I make out? Can I distinguish? I must reach out to be able to absorb and understand the music. Or there is this part which is observing myself enjoying the music. And these two tend to mix. But the true connoisseur, appreciator of music, is one who forgets himself in the music, becomes one with the music, and experiences the music. Not I listening and judging. And it is then that the music flows. Or even as you're playing the music, I am playing, fades out, there is only music which flows through. So the egoism is described on three levels: mind, life, and body, and the senses. So, the cosmic functionings through which the gods act, mind, life, speech, senses, body, must become aware of something beyond them which governs them, by which they are and move, by whose force they evolve, enlarge themselves, and arrive at power and joy and capacity. Leaving the false idea of independent action and self-ordering, which is an egoism of mind and life and sense, they must become consciously passive to the power, light, and joy of something which is beyond themselves. So in our experience subjectively, it's as if you become conscious of this presence of the divine to which you open and offer yourself, and knowing that as power and light and joy, you seek to reflect that, to let it express. What happens then is that this divine unnameable, capital U, unnameable, we will come to why he uses that term. What happens then is that this divine unnameable reflects himself openly in the gods. So these powers within us which were working, as they turn and receive, that reflects openly. Meaning it was always reflecting in them. It was not open. It was concealed. You have an intelligence. You think it is yours. You think you had this idea. But in fact, all the time, the idea was from there. All the time, the intelligence was a part of that cosmic intelligence. You just didn't know it. Now, when you become conscious and open your intelligence to it, its intelligence reflects openly. You're aware that it is the working of that higher intelligence. And so, that works in you directly, freely. His light takes possession of the thinking mind. His power and joy of the life. His light and rapture of the emotional mind and the senses. So not only they begin to reflect, as they reflect, because the light is substance, it fills and seizes the material in which it reflects. Now our image, our idea of reflection is like the mirror. The light hits, bounces off. The mirror is unchanged. Now think of the mirror not as a mere surface, but as a transparent, three-dimensional material. The light hits, reflects, but what it passes through the material, it is soaking the material. This is what is happening in these three aspects. So, light, power, and joy, all of these reflect in our being and through our being, but they soak in and fill everything, even as they reflect and act through. And the result is, as they soak in, something begins to change. They seize the material. Now, if the mirror is not very polished, as this light falls, it works on the mirror to make it more bright, removing its cloudiness, make it more transparent, more clear, more perfect. Because what is reflecting is power. Not only the power acts on the things through the mirror, but it acts on the mirror itself, which is also a thing, isn't it? You cannot separate the two. So it makes it better as a mirror. Similarly, there is the joy. The joy which it fills into the environment, into the activity, also now fills the substance through which it radiates. We ourselves experience a greater filling of joy within us, even as that joy expresses into the forms of activity. So the power, the light, the joy, all these are changing us even as they change and express in the environment. So his light takes possession of the thinking mind, that is the domain where the light of the knowledge is most obvious. His power and joy of the life energies are not reflectors of knowledge, but of the power and the joy which comes with the power. And in the emotions, it is his light and rapture of the emotional mind and the senses. Now, this is a domain which is touching almost the material consciousness. The senses are the mind touching the material body. It is the mind through the senses looking out. In the same way, our life energies, as they embed themselves in the mind and body, take on this emotional character, the emotional mind. And as a result, through this whole transmission, something of the supreme image of Brahman falls upon the world nature and changes it into divine nature. Not the whole of it, just a little bit, or something of it. And as it falls, it begins this change. Now recall, he says right at the beginning of this sentence, this divine unnameable reflects himself openly in the gods. Remember, unnameable, why is it? You recall earlier in our study, the Kena Upanishad had declared that cannot be known. Verse 3, their sight travels not, nor speech nor mind. We know it not, nor can distinguish how one should teach of it. For it is other than the known. Whatever you may know, that is not it. It is other than the known. It is there above the unknown. It is not even unknown. It is above the unknown. So the unknown is still something you know. You know that it is unknown. You see? When you say, I have a box, I know the box. What is inside the box is unknown. But there is an inside that I am aware of. Beyond the unknown is that which I cannot be aware of. As an example, conceive of something which is not of time and space. You cannot. Your mind cannot. Unknowable. It's not unknown, it is unknowable. So it is of a different order altogether than the domain of known and unknown. It is unknowable. And you cannot give a word to it. Because to give it a name is to put it in the domain of shape, form, space, time. I call this flower. I remember as a kid, there was an aquarium in the school and there was a girl who came and pointed to the fish and said, "What is this?" And the teacher said, "That is a fish." And the girl said, "Oh." And I thought to myself, how stupid is that? You put a label to it and you say, "Oh, you've understood." The teacher is also stupid, thinking that giving a name to it tells you what it is. Isn't it? But that's how our mind works. We give a name, we say, I know what it is. You don't know what it is. You don't know what is fish. Think about it that way. Remove the label fish. What is this? And try to tell me what it is. And you will come up with beautiful description. It's a living being who feels like this, who acts like this, who swims like this, who eats like this, who enjoys the play in the ocean. Yes, then you know it better. putting a label, it's just another label. But this is how the mind works. It puts labels. Once it knows something or it thinks it knows, it puts a label to replace the knowledge of what it knows with an easy token to play with. And so in our mind we build tokens and tokens of tokens of tokens of tokens, a whole hierarchy of tokens. But all this is possible as long as you're operating in the world of form, in the domain of space and time. Even time is the word. What is time? So there's a joke. This Indian approaches Einstein and says on the railway station, "Sir, what is time?" And Einstein says, "That, my friend, is one of the imponderables of the universe." You see, in English you say, "What is the time?" It means the time on the watch. What is time? You're asking the question, the fundamental question, what is time? And Einstein, because he's one of those who played with that concept in physics, he says, you cannot answer that. It is imponderable. You cannot even think about it. It's beyond your capacity to think. What is space? You can speak of the experience of space, but what is space itself? It goes beyond your capacity to think. And yet you can give it a name. We can give names to things we do not know or are unable to know. So in the known and the unknown, you can give names. And the names can hold very complex experiences which you can never describe or define, but you can experience. And now what happens when you go beyond these two? To the unknowable, it is also unnameable. Of course, the mind still gives it to it a name. We call it unnameable. But the name tells us nothing. It tells us nothing because when you say space, I don't know what is space, I cannot define space, but you know what I mean. When I say time, you know what I mean. But when I say unnameable, I don't know. You don't know. We agree that it is something beyond our capacity to know. So this divine unnameable, which could never be known, is actually now reflecting himself openly in these powers within us. This is an exceptional achievement. But this is the direction to which our evolution has been leading us. And it is in this that we have our highest fulfillment of our evolution. So the unnameable, while still being unnameable and unknowable, can reflect himself and reveal himself. And this is what begins to happen. Something of the supreme image of Brahman falls upon the world nature and changes it into divine nature. What will that mean? When that reflects here, what is the nature of that divinity? How does that transition take place? That becomes the discussion of the next paragraph. And we will take that up in detail in the next session, which is Sunday after next, as I will be out of station on next Sunday. For those who are coming here, we will play a video of some other talks which may be of interest to keep the mood of the study. But the text itself we will take up Sunday after next, which is on 31st. For now we can dwell on this idea of the working of the gods in us. Cease to think upon of these powers of the mind, life, speech, senses, even the working of the body, as mere mechanisms, as mere phenomena automatically happening. Become conscious of them as conscious powers working in the cosmos, which are powers of the divine. And in thus becoming conscious, we can turn this awareness to the divine. What is the nature of that shift? I am tempted to give an example here from one of Mother's messages, and we can close with this. See, what does it mean that these impulses or these powers within us become conscious of the divine and turn to the divine? And the Mother gives it this very practical form. She gave as guideline to the students of the ashram school this particular effort to the athletics competition of 1962. She says, replace the ambition to be first by the will to do the best possible. Replace the desire for success by the yearning for progress. Replace the eagerness for fame by the aspiration for perfection. If you look at these three things, all of these impulses are in us. And innately these impulses are egocentric, egoistic. Ambition, I want to be first. It's good, it helps you to make that extra effort. And I want to be successful. Or you say, I want to be famous. And these are the drives. And they're the workings of the gods in the consciousness of the ego. When the gods become conscious that it's not me, it's not my fame, it's not my success, it's not my coming first, because they become aware of something greater, larger, freer, wider, one. This whole idea of I win and someone loses is strange, pointless. I win against a monkey. If I challenge myself against something which is totally incapable of, I can prove myself to have a greater intellect or a greater strength if I am fighting a little dog or whatever it is. So what does it mean to be first? It has no absolute or real value. What has real value? The will to do the best possible. And you'll see the ambition to be first is the same impulse clouded and bound in the ego. You remove the ego formation and what comes through the same impulse, the purity of the impulse is the will to do the best possible. It's still the best possible, but it's not in competition with anyone. It is your own innate potential that is becoming the best possible. Similarly, success and the desire for success is replaced by the yearning for progress. Now, success is a fixed point. You can stop with it. I have attained success by whatever it is you defined as your success. But the yearning for progress is not bound to a fixed formation. It continues. But the impulse behind is the same, with the ego removed. And similarly, the eagerness for fame, the aspiration for perfection. And in perfection is a satisfaction greater than what comes with the sense of fame. And then Mother completes this message by saying, physical education is meant to bring into the body consciousness and control, discipline and mastery, all things necessary for a higher and better life. Keep all that in mind, practice sincerely, and you will become a good athlete. But that's not all. This is the first step on the way to be a true man. You see, all this basic disciplining and mastery and control and the consciousness and the body, it gives you a certain capacity and perfection of the body's capabilities, but the first step on the way to be a true man, and that's the larger goal, towards which the first three guidelines she has given, they apply all through, in all the parts of our being. So I'll just reread those. Replace the ambition to be first by the will to do the best possible. Replace the desire for success by the yearning for progress. Replace the eagerness for fame by the aspiration for perfection. This is the gods in us awakening to their source and aligning that and reflecting that.